So we start with the EPP, Madame Spiraki.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. The file is a starting point on the chemical strategy for sustainability, which, as you know, is one of the pillars of the Green Deal. In this regard, the new sustainable chemical strategy should first be coherent and complementary to other policy objectives of the Green Deal, such as Circular Economy Action Plan 2, and also part of the framework of the Industrial Strategy and EU Beating Cancer Plan. I would like, first of all, to thank all the co-sponsors for our fruitful collaboration, and we are looking forward to further cooperation at the level of technical meetings, which are now under process. With this report, the European Parliament calls to the Commission to come forward with the chemical strategy for sustainability based on the following key priorities. The first one is to upgrade the level of protection of the consumers and the environment. For example, the Parliament is asking for elimination of risks and/or hazardous substances and substitutions to safer alternatives when feasible, and calls the Commission to take into account the risk posed from endocrine disruptors and the combination effect of different chemicals. In addition, we should promote a science-based grouping approach. One assessment should not contradict nor prevent the development of grouping approach to assess families as a whole. This report also aims to set chemical safety standards for the entire world, and it's not too ambitious, as it maybe sounds. ECHA should support the EU's international trade policy by defining provisions and fostering regulatory systems built upon EU standards for chemical safety. This would enhance protection beyond the EU's borders and extend the level playing field. It is also important to ensure enforceability of restrictive measures on chemicals before they start applying. We need methods to control products at the borders of the Union or on the shelf, but we cannot rely on paper statements. This is the only way to ensure a level playing field between domestic products and imported products. The chemical strategy for sustainability should be based upon robust, well-grounded scientific evidence and accompanied by impact assessments with the participation and contribution of the relevant stakeholders. It should also grant sufficient time for the industry manufacturers to deliver safe and performing products and not undermine the EU industrial production and economy. The strategy should secure adequate funding to accelerate the development of innovative and safer alternatives, supported by new tools for predictive toxicology and sustainability assessments for products and based on objective criteria such as functional requirements, fully safety and economic assessment of alternatives, life cycle environmental impact analysis, scientific assessment of comparative real-world risks, and economic impact assessments. In addition, regulatory stability and predictability is key to enhancing innovation. It is of paramount importance that the strategy should highlight the level of implementation of the existing EU legislation on chemicals, asking the Member States to fully implement the legislation in order to provide a safe and sustainable environment, and of course, as well as a competitive European market. Closing this short intervention, I hope, Mr. President, the strategy should ensure that the unnecessary animal tests are avoided. Last but not least, with this report, the Parliament should support the role of ECHA, asking for predictable and sustainable funding mechanisms for the agency. With this report, we call on the Commission and the Council to refrain from cutting ECHA's resources and provide additional resources. ECHA's role is very crucial and progressively demanding. In this regard, we call the Commission to establish a fully connected and interoperable EU chemical safety database platform to facilitate seamless sharing of data between authorities and provide public access to researchers, regulators, industry and the citizen at large. This is a proposal initiated by ECHA, which is endorsed and fully supported by us and from members, from other colleagues, from different groups in this committee. Once again, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. If I could ask the other co-rapporteurs to limit themselves to 3 minutes, that would be great, not for myself, but for the other speakers. Maria Arena for SND.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chairman. As my colleague has said, as part of the Green Deal, I welcome the Commission's ambition to go towards zero pollution and to a non-toxic environment. That's what we're working towards as part of our strategy. There are two objectives that we owe to citizens and to the planet and our society. It's our duty to protect citizens from toxic harm that we are exposed to everywhere and every day. The costs in terms of human health when exposed to these subjects really is a major cost for our society. And we have to look at current products put on the planet and put on the market in the future. The biodiversity strategy is affected by the toxic products we put on the market. I'm thinking about fertilizers and pesticides, which have a terrible impact on biodiversity. The biodiversity strategy shows that there is a paradox. The Commission wants there to be a 50% reduction in high-risk pesticides by 2030, but overall production will double. Overall production of these products will double. So there is an inconsistency there. We have to recognize this problem. We need to have a more responsible use of chemical products. We need to reduce them in our society, and we need to shift towards substances which aren't hazardous or harmful. There should be various priorities. There needs to be consistency between chemical legislation, and they need to be correctly enforced. We also need to speed up the assessment procedures by having a group approach, by mainstreaming the group approach. We also need to limit the use of dangerous substances. It's not acceptable for cancer-causing products and endocrine disruptors to be found in the products we consume on a day-to-day basis, such as toys, cosmetics, and even food packaging. For our legislation to be adapted to the real exposure of citizens to chemical products, we need to constantly take into account the combined exposure. The cocktail effect of multiple chemical exposures is much more risky than if you're subjected to an isolated product. We also need to protect the most vulnerable people. For instance, workers who are exposed to large volumes. We also need to look at the issue of endocrine disruptors, shift to low-risk pesticides, and reduce our overall usage of pesticides. We also need to ensure transparency to consumers throughout the life cycle of the products they bought. The chemical industry plays an important role in the European economy. That goes without saying. We must protect the health of our citizens and the environment. We need to be there for the industry as it shifts towards a more non-toxic approach, which is based on the circular economy. Thank you very much, and thank you for having stuck to the 3 minutes. Frédéric Ries, same to you.
Faire aussi bien. Richa, aujourd'hui. Thank you. It's 14 years now. It was in 2006 that we adopted our chemicals legislation, which was quite rightly considered the most ambitious in the world at the time. We have evaluated over 20,000 chemical substances and ensure that responsibility is taken throughout the chain, which means that if you don't have data, then you can't market your product. Today, we're seeing that not everyone is sticking to this. 60 to 70% of chemicals produced in Europe in 2019 had gaps in their data. As Bjorn Hansen has said, the director of ECHA said, and I welcome him here today, I hope. So we need to improve respect for the legislation, and this was our main priority and has to remain so in the coming years. So we have to set standards with the Commission, who are presenting their chemical strategy just after September. We have to ensure that we can guarantee health of European citizens, as well as guaranteeing protection for the environment, and also to ensure that we have confidence, particularly ensure that we protect citizens who are exposed to a cocktail of chemicals in our day-to-day lives, makeup, cosmetics, food products, etc. The two previous speakers have clearly set out the principles, so I'd just like to give you a few examples. In paragraph 4, we ask for consistency between different legislation. There are about 20 different pieces of legislation in total on pesticides, biocides, and all sectoral legislation on waste, for example, construction material, packaging. A concrete example is phthalates. In 2018, ECHA said that 20% of toys that were tested had banned phthalates in them, and yet this was something that we voted on in 2005, so it had been over 10 years. So clearly the legislation isn't enough. If children are exposed to the same endocrine disruptors that they have in packaging and so forth, then we're going to have to ensure that we have to review the 2004 food contact materials legislation. So this is what we're aiming at in our paragraph 20. This paper and cardboard packaging, which allows the endocrine disruptors to pass through. So we have to show that we in Europe are very ambitious about this. Everyone is asking for a ban in principle, and this is our point 21. Dark Waters, the American film, which was shown just before the lockdown, showed that there was a very strong mobilization of public opinion about the dangers of very harmful chemicals that are found in a number of products. And as previous speakers have said, we still don't have harmonized regulation. So there's a fragmentation in the EU market here. We are currently working on 35 draft compromises, and the message, the very cornerstone of this, has to be the same as it was for pesticides, where the Commission put the bar very high when it came up with its farm to fork strategy. Europe has to show the precautionary principle and be ambitious when it comes to protecting the health of its citizens and our planet. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't quite as good as the previous speaker.
Mr. Lancini.
Dell'Unione Europea. Pronto? Mi sentite?
Can you hear me? Says the speaker. Yes, we can hear. Okay.
Ok. Nel contempo la crisi Covid-19.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown how important it is in the EU to protect chemical projects in the whole chain. We need to ensure that we look at the circularity of materials and emissions. The objectives of this reduction has to be pursued within the framework of the current legislation and the REACH regulation, as well as in sectoral legislation, for example, food, packaging products, and also when it comes to health and safety at work. We have different regulatory frameworks and traditions. We have to ensure stability in legislation for long-term investment. Another priority is products entering the single market and proper implementation of legislation on chemical products in order to ensure unfair competition and market distortion. In this strategy, we have an opportunity to emphasize the importance of looking at risk analysis and exposure to certain substances, and we also have to ensure we recall how dangerous products are is taken into consideration, and this has to be one of the parameters. We have to look at, for example, concentration and length of exposure. We have to base this on empirical information, and that should be the basis of any evaluation. And on the evaluation, the European Commission should not forget the importance of impact assessments, which should be at the base of any binding legislation. We also need to ensure that animal testing only takes place when it is essential. We need to have strategies for smart testing, and this can help us to get the data that we need in a more efficient manner, and that will allow us to properly evaluate these substances. We also need to emphasize the importance of consumer responsibility for all products. Thank you, Chair.
Grazie. So we move to the Greens. Sven Giegold.
Wir blicken der Klimakrise, der
Climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, pollution crisis. We're looking at all of that. The chemical sector has contributed to these catastrophes and disasters. In its current form, the European industry with 1.2 million jobs will not be competitive. But the zero harm, zero pollution goal of the new Green Deal can really help transform the European chemical industry. The EU has to have a framework so that chemicals made in Europe contribute to the Paris Agreement and to the protection of humans and nature, and must also contribute to future-proof jobs. Unfortunately, that has not been achieved in the EU recovery plan. We haven't moved towards a poison-free or a harm-free approach. This strategy needs to be embedded into a clean approach. We need to have clear clear goals in order to reduce energy consumption. If we're going to save these 1.2 million jobs, we need to have a competitive industry, but one that also doesn't pollute. We need to support innovative companies. Particularly hazardous substances must not be authorized if there are better alternatives available. The sustainable chemicals strategy should be based on 4 pillars, looking at nanomaterials, the cocktail effect, and chemicals in products, among others. We should strengthen European chemicals law, REACH. We also need to have more regulation on plastic. It is unacceptable that we are still allowing environmentally harmful plastic. We shouldn't keep banning one dangerous substance one after another. We need to ban them as a whole. Products such as phenol R is almost the same as pentophil F or S, or could be replaced by those, which are different. The more other chemicals could be grouped together, and then we wouldn't have to go through 4,000 different individual processes. If we have a material group that is classified as hazardous, that should apply across the board. If you have a product that is dangerous in a toy, then it shouldn't be allowed in a cosmetic. So we therefore need to simplify and harmonize EU law. That is the only way that we will be promoting clean chemical production in Europe and protecting European citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. For ECR, Pietro Fiocchi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The key role of the Parliament, I know it's obvious, but is the controlling role for the agency ECHA and REACH regulation, because they have a key role in the strategy for the chemicals in Europe. There are some key principles that we need to follow. One is the impact assessment on the chemicals, and the other one is the impact assessment on the alternatives. The number one is that impact assessment on the chemicals should be based also on historical data from the industry. In other words, if a particular chemical substance, no matter how dangerous, has been used with very good track record by the industry, it should be used. Some example is the uranium for the nuclear industry, but also lead for the battery and the ammunition industry. It's kind of like COVID. I mean, if you know the danger and you take action, you can handle it, you can manage it. The second point is the impact assessment on alternative. In other words, we cannot ban a chemical substance if we do not have a proven scientific data that the alternative is better. For example, ECHA wants to ban lead, which is a material that I know very well, you know, the highest recycled metals in Europe, in the world, actually. So if you consider the GHG emission, steel and copper, which are alternatives, have an emission which is up to 6 times as high in the recycling process than lead. If you look at the cost, most of the alternatives have between 3 and 6 times a higher cost. If you look at the availability, there are a lot of materials which are not available if you ban lead, like bismuth, for example. And not only that, the socioeconomic impact, if money and substance will kill companies and jobs, the EU has the moral responsibility to find a way to fix the socioeconomic impact. So ban is not the answer. We need to analyze everything by scientific data and make sure that the economic system will survive and there is alternative substances which will do the job in a good way. In the conclusion, let's be very pragmatic, especially in the initial phase, considering the economic impact of the virus, where increasing regulatory and bureaucratic aspects can kill thousands of companies and have a dramatic impact on the EU economy. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And Anna Azakamp for the GUE.
Thank you, Chair. It is imperative that we fundamentally change the way we deal with chemicals in our society. The right to a toxic-free environment must be finally guaranteed for all of us. But before this to happen, many things have to change, because right now, economic interests are prevailing over health interests. Research has shown that when there is notable national industry whose profits are based on a certain chemical substance, member states tend to avoid proposing this chemical for the candidate list, regardless if this chemical has a health or environmental concern. And the Commission itself is still authorizing uses of some of the most harmful carcinogenics and mutagenics, which are already on the candidate list, claiming that there are no alternatives. The Commission is allowing workers and consumer exposure so we can have shiny toilet bowls or shiny white toothpaste, as if this is something that is essential to our existence. And the subject that worries me the most, farmers are still spraying fruits, vegetables and cereals that end up on our plates with chemicals that kill our pollinators, pollute our soils and our waters, and that cause many diseases such as cancer and Parkinson's disease. And these are just a few illustrations of how our whole system and the way we assess, approve and use chemicals needs to change. I would like to hear the reaction of the Commission and Mr. Hansen to them. What will the strategy bring to change these unhealthy practices? What will the Commission do to ensure that our health is no longer impacted by harmful chemicals? And what targets, legal instruments and timelines will it propose for that? We see a lot of aggressive lobbying from the chemical industry to delay or dilute the ambitions. And of course, they will use the argument that COVID-19 crisis is putting enough pressure on their businesses and that they cannot handle additional legislation. But I do hope that we have learned from the corona outbreak that prevention is the best cure, that our health is the most important, and that we need to listen to experts and follow their advice to save lives. So please let us listen to science and truly and rapidly work towards a toxic-free environment. And of course, without the use of laboratory animals. Thank you.
Thank you. So we move to the Catch the Eye, starting with Peter Liese.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to all the colleagues that helped to prepare this draft resolution. I think we definitely have a problem. We know that a lot of chemicals create diseases in human beings and also negative effects on the environment. We don't know enough, but we know that there is a problem, and I think we need action from the European Commission, and we need also action by the Parliament. I think the resolution is a very good base. I would explicitly highlight the importance of point 7, a scientific base for the regulation and a proper impact assessment. Why? I think we cannot, we will not, and we should not ban everything where there is a toxic substance, but we need to achieve that humans and the environment are less imposed to toxic substances. There are natural toxic substances produced by plants, for example. We cannot ban these plants. And we should also look at those areas where legislation brings the biggest possible effect. So where human beings and the nature is exposed by a very dangerous substances and the measure is proportionate, we can reduce the problem a lot, and where we also have good alternatives. So I think this point is of particular importance, scientific base and impact assessment, but then a courageous legislation that really improves the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. For Renew, so I don't have any SND speaker. For Renew, Martin Ocik, who is the contact person for ECA.
Hello. Sorry.
Super busy.
Yeah, I have 2 meetings at the same time. It's not really easy. So thank you very much, Chair. Really appreciate it. Didn't expect to be so fast on Catch the Eye. And thank you, Bon, and everybody else who was helping to draft the resolution. I think what we are facing is really quite a bit of challenge in terms of hazardous chemicals around us. But in order to meet that challenge, we need, I believe, 2 things. One thing is we need to have a strong agency and strong administration which is efficient, which is able to, where we see a higher level of collaboration between the agencies, in this case dealing with chemicals, which has sufficient capacities. Of course, also the capacities on the level of the Commission, but also we need a drive that supports innovation, that is very clearly saying and pointing a policy direction to the industry. We will not give you any bianco checks. We want to see green innovation by hopefully European companies bringing out safer substitutes to the market. Because for circular economy, and that's kind of also my question to the Commission there, is how do you want to meet the challenges of the circular economy package with toxic chemicals still in the system? I think this is one of the crucial tasks, is to really speed up the substitution of hazardous chemicals. Thank you.
Thank you. For the Greens, Jutta Paulus.
Nicht die einzige in diesem Hohen Haus, die selber mal in einem
I've actually worked in a laboratory. I've carried out application procedures for REACH. I won't name any names. However, I would point out that when it comes to REACH legislation, there is massive enforcement problems. There's a walking around and avoidance of research, of REACH. Sometimes there is no supply of data. Sometimes there's a failure to provide data. So I think I must launch an urgent appeal. We have to be tough. Some send their dossiers in correctly and submit it correctly. And then they suffer because there are others who send in an incomplete dossier, or they send in a dossier with incomplete information, but they also get market authorization. They therefore don't actually comply with the whole system. Thank you.
Thank you. For ECR, Mr. Tercht.
La química nos ha demostrado en esta catástrofe.
We've seen the strategic importance of this during the pandemic, both in producing products and healthcare protection and disinfection. The idea of a strong European industry is a chimera, and we're seeing that once again. We have to ensure we explore new economies in the new markets in the circular economy. We have to ensure that the chemical industry isn't seen as an isolated tool. The Commission has to look for synergies within the circular economy plan and the new strategy for Europe. It's impossible to substitute some potentially harmful products. We have to ensure that we have reasonable timelines for doing this. Not all of them have the same characteristics or level of dangerousness. So the Commission has to be flexible in substitution. And something that the ECHA has said on a number of times, we have to ensure that chemicals used in various areas are analysed the same. Sometimes they're analysed very differently by EFSA or ECHA, and the Commission has to ensure that synergies between these types of procedures to ensure that we have a proper, strong, common basis. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have now 3 speakers from Renew only. Yanu Tema, to start with.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, everybody. I think it's a very good debate that we speak about this. I think it's important that we keep the goal very clear, that we should reduce the impact of the environment. What I feel a little bit that we always tend to go in some sort of a bottom-down approach very much, but I don't believe that we solve the problem with that. We have to look a little bit more to the bottom-up approach and to see the responsibility of us all, instead of blaming the industry, of blaming a specific actor in this. Because in recent studies, again, a lot of harmful substances measured in protected nature areas, the majority of them are emitted by, for example, the consumer, by households. So, for example, anti-mosquito, chemicals in flea collars, disinfection products, substances for asphalt roads, substances from emissions from car engines, pollution because of medicines. And if we want to have some sort of a support of our policy, we should, I think, prevent some sort of a polarization, but we say, okay, we should act on this together. And of course, one leading is that we have good legislation here, but also try to see how we can find solutions in the whole chain there. Otherwise, I think we still are continuing in circles and we are not solving the actual problem, namely reducing the impact on the environment. So how can we do this?
Thank you. Ulrike Müller.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. I want to add to what has just been said. If you look at our proposal for resolution, you get the impression that all chemicals are bad and dangerous. And if we are to protect the public, then they should all be avoided. Of course, they need to be tightly regulated. But we are forgetting that chemicals are a central pillar in progress and our prosperity. We should say that as well. We should be allowed to say that. Without chemical innovation, the further development of materials and manufacturing processes is not possible. I'm also thinking that we need to have ambitious goals when it comes to the environment and health. Of course we want that, but we cannot leave innovation to fall by the wayside. Better material will bring greater safety, for instance in wind turbines, batteries, medication. In all of those areas, the chemical sector is an important partner. Of course, anything that has an effect also has side effects. That's why it's all the more important that we have rational regulation of risk management, and that be our approach. And then we need to lay the groundwork for research in the area of climate, environment, and health, and that must be taken into account. But we mustn't fall into a trap, and I want to warn you of this in this committee. We shouldn't criticize all chemicals. Chemicals can help us in the achievement of our goals, and that should be underscored in this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker, Asger Christensen. No? Okay, very short. Thank you. So we move now to the Commission.
Please press the speak button.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the floor, and to all honourable members for the discussion, as well as for the draft resolution. It's a very timely action, and it's very, very good to hear from this August House its opinion. The chemical strategy is the next big deliverable from the environmental angle under the Green Deal, and it's going to be, I believe, a game changer. Now, we haven't had a strategic document on chemicals in Europe for nearly 20 years, so certainly it's about the time that we have it, because since the white paper on the chemical, which gave birth to REACH and all other key chemical legislation, we have had implementation, we have had build-up of various institutions such as Chemicals Agency, we have done already evaluations and fitness checks, but we haven't really given a strategic thought of where we're going next. And that's why this chemical strategy is meant to precisely to do that. We want to listen to various stakeholders. That's why we have opened a public consultation on the roadmap. And in the roadmap, we outlined the key pillars of what this strategy should be. And I think it resonates pretty well with what we've heard today. Maybe just a bit different structure, but all the topics that you have mentioned will be addressed one or another way. Now, the objective number one is to strengthen the legislation in order so that it protects us better. We need to protect better vulnerable groups. We need to protect from chemicals that have turned out to be hazardous, and we need to, in general, we need to be sure that everybody, environment and the health of the people, are better protected. And the second pillar, very important one, is to boost innovation and competitiveness, because Europe has the expertise to produce better, safer, more sustainable chemicals, and we have that expertise and knowledge better than anybody else. We have the biggest database in the world on chemicals, that is with European Chemicals Agency. We really have to strategically use it, and we can use it to produce more sustainable and safer chemicals. And by doing this, I'm pretty sure we can also raise our competitiveness, because competitors who have lower protection standards can produce them more cheaply. But our competitive advantage is producing something better and reconquering the markets like this. Third objective is the rationalization and coherence of legal framework, because we can simplify things by increasing protection. Right now we have 40 pieces of law that one or another way regulate chemicals. And sometimes we have loopholes, sometimes we have gaps, sometimes we have overlaps. And sometimes it is abused and used to lower the protection. We have to close these gaps, but also have to simplify the whole framework so that it's cheaper to implement, it's easier to implement, it's easier to administer also for businesses, but it protects better. And that win-win solution is possible. Then we also have to, and that's the fourth objective, is to strengthen the science and chemicals, knowledge on chemicals. We need more data. We have the biggest database in the world, I mentioned to you, but it's really the tip of the iceberg. There is so much more to discover, because we have hundreds of thousands of chemicals on the market, and we don't know much about them yet, unfortunately. We know about the most potent ones, we know about those that are the most common chemicals, but there are many other specialty chemicals which we don't really know. So we need to increase that knowledge, and we also need to know what our exposure is, where do these chemicals occur, where they are, do they pose the risk, can they be safely managed? So all that knowledge is absolutely necessary. And then the fifth one is the global action, because even though we have the biggest and most protective system, we still operate in global economy, and our value chains are global, and our competitors are global, and we want to be part of the global market and successful part of the global market. And we'd like other parts of the world also to raise the standards and to follow our lead. And that's why we really have to look back into what happens globally. There were a couple of very important interventions here mentioned. One of them, for instance, was implementation. And I fully agree that we have written probably a many very good pieces, but implementation really lacks. And one telling example is indeed the quality of the dossiers under REACH. And that's why, together with Chemicals Agency, we have a joint evaluation plan, which we are undertaking, and we are pressing companies, we're pressing the registrants to really update their dossiers. We go one after the other in order to make sure that the data in the dossiers is complete and is true. And that's absolutely important. And also, there were also calls to make sure that we do impact assessments when we make the decisions. I can tell you that at least under REACH and the CLP, the two key planks of the chemicals legislation, there is a socioeconomic analysis. So before taking decisions, we really make the socioeconomic analysis. But of course, if it were to come to change the legislation as such, for which we would then have to come to you for that change, surely all that change will be accompanied by the impact, really robust impact assessments. And last remark is on the links with circular economy and on the need to use sometimes these chemicals. It's true that sometimes chemicals, hazardous chemicals, toxic chemicals, make products more durable or make products functional. Let's take an example of batteries, for example. Cobalt is carcinogen, is known carcinogen, yet without it, we don't have good battery. Maybe in the future we'll have good battery without cobalt, but right now we need it. And we have examples like this through many products. But surely our legislation, our goal should be to replace these chemicals with something that's better, with something that's more sustainable, with something that's less toxic. So for now, we have to see if we can manage the risks. And if these risks are really high, then we really have to act really robustly. But at the same time, our programs, our innovation has to move us forward. We have to, again, produce something that is better, and we have to produce more sustainably all these chemicals. Like this, we give ourselves competitive advantage, and we also protect ourselves better. So this is what the chemical strategy will aim to do. There will be lots of details in it, but I already see that what you are proposing in your resolution resonates really well with what we are contemplating in the Commission. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to Björn Hansen, the Executive Director of ECHA. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here to talk to you about chemicals and the chemical strategy. My starting point would be to say that chemicals industry, and in particular European chemicals industry, is the industry of industries, which basically means that if we want a thriving manufacturing industry in Europe, having a thriving chemicals industry is definitely a big help. Another issue or another point is that absolutely everything that surrounds us in our households, in our workplace, when we drive a car or call on the phone, is made of chemicals. Any material is nothing but a mixture of chemicals. So basically any conditionalities that we want to put on anything that we have, use or manufacture will have impact on the chemicals that are being manufactured. And the other way around. Those chemicals have an impact on everything that we see, use, or consume. If we look here from the European Chemicals Agency at all the policy documents that the Commission is coming out with, starting with the Green Deal, but also looking at the Circular Economy Action Plan, the industry strategy, the digital strategy, plastic strategy, the Europe Beating Cancer Plan, zero pollution aim, and also now the elements coming in terms of the COVID-19 recovery plan. Then we see basically a number of additional conditions put on the chemicals that we want here in Europe, on top of the conditions that are already put on chemicals. And these conditions fall basically in three categories, the way we see it. One is on energy, another is on safety, and a third is on circular economy. Energy, basically the linkage between climate neutrality 2050 and chemicals is the fact that chemical industry is a very large energy demanding industry. And don't forget that cement is a chemical and so is steel. So therefore, if we look at all chemicals being manufactured in Europe, then they are one of the biggest demanders of energy. And the energy that chemical industry needs to manufacture its chemicals is directly linked to how much energy it takes in a chemical reaction to create another molecule. And hence, the climate neutrality, if we want also to reduce the demand of energy, then reaching climate neutrality also has a lot to do with shifting or changing the chemistry that we apply to produce molecules. That's the energy side. Then there's the safety side that we read into these documents, where there's quite a number of additional demands that are coming from these policy document statements and indeed your own resolution on safety. And just to mention a few, the zero pollution aim, basically we would read means that any chemical that we manufacture, it is inevitable that any chemical that is manufactured could end up in the environment. And hence a conditionality of a zero pollution aim is that that chemical, if it ends up in the environment, does fully degrade into parts which are natural and do not cause harm. There are other elements of safety that were mentioned already by the honourable members, talking about cocktail of chemicals out there, endocrine disruptors, vulnerable populations, etc., all adding up to an increasing concept of safety that plays back to new demands on chemicals. And then comes circularity, which also is a demand on chemicals. Again, circular economy is all about having materials which we can recycle over and over again. And any material is made up of a mixture of chemicals. And the recyclability of a material is dependent on which chemicals go into that material and enable it to be recycled. Looking at those three conditionalities, our conclusion here in ECA is that we have a long way to go in order to invent the chemicals that we want in 2050, that fulfill all those conditionalities. So effectively, we see two things. We need to promote innovation in order to help our European industry manufacture those chemicals which we want in 2050, and we need to deal with the chemicals that are on the market today. And this is where ECA could help in both areas. If I start with the chemicals that we have today, where we could help is definitely to accelerate the work that we're already doing. Here we've been discussing, I've been in Parliament to my annual dialogue with you, where we've talked about accelerating the compliance check under REACH, accelerating the risk management under REACH in restrictions and in authorization, but also accelerating the risk management in the biocides area. And when we talk about acceleration, we're not talking about reducing science. We're talking about simplifying and identifying those elements which are most important for decision makers and making sure that the science there is correct. So we're not reducing the science, we're focusing in on what you need to make decisions. Another area to accelerate today is to look at the whole conglomerate of chemicals legislation, which many of the honourable members have mentioned, and also Kęstutis from the European Commission, that we do have a lot of chemicals legislation, which does ensure a high level of protection for human health and the environment. However, it's not very consistent and it's not very synergistic. And we think that a lot can be done I see it under the umbrella of what is called one substance, one assessment, in order to increase consistencies and increase synergies. We've prepared a number of thoughts with the European Food Safety Agency on how this can be done. If we look to the future and look at the chemicals we want in 2050, then clearly what we could help out with is to help define from a technical and scientific perspective what is a sustainable chemical. And a sustainable chemical looking at these three aspects, looking at the energy consumption used in the chemical reaction to produce it, looking at safety, and also looking at circularity, meaning the ability for the material to be recycled. Another area where we think we can contribute, I think Kęstutis in particular mentioned this, is in the area of data. If we look at the data strategy, then one of the elements of the data strategy is to make the vast amount of information, high quality, highly structured data that authorities have in Europe available in order to generate a digital economy in using it. And this is something that we can help with our expertise and competence in IT and in data to make this available, to generate a digital economy using chemical safety data to make better products in the future, but also to ensure the ones that are there are used more safely. And then finally, we think we could also help in supporting industry's innovation and innovative efforts to create the molecules that we need in 2050. Here we have a competence in ICA in safety, and it makes no sense, or rather it makes efficient sense, to try to divide up what needs to be done to get to the chemicals we need in the future. We are very good at chemical safety, and we would expect that not all chemical companies can build up the same competence in safety as we have. So if we can find a partnership where we contribute in this partnership on the chemical safety side and let industry focus on making sure that they develop molecules that can be used for specific purposes in society, and we make sure that the energy consumption is low together with the circularity, and we do that together, then there is a good chance that we can meet the 2050 Green Deal objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we will vote on the oral question of June 25th in ENV, and then in the plenary July 20.